So just a bit of background, like Joe said, I used to work on O3DE at Amazon, and now I'm at Meta working in Reality Labs research and uh, doing graphics research work. So we're not, um, we don't have like a full art team to support us. A lot of kind of prototypes are done with the standard meshes you have, like Suzanne, the Blender monkey head, and like the teapot or the kind of the statue. I forget I think Lucy is the name of the statue. So these kind of meshes that you see everywhere, the dragon, the famous dragon. Um, but it's nice to obviously test with better content, with like more realistic or more full-fledged content. And so recently we got a license to Cargo, and we've been using that to quickly set up some scenes to test for our research, and highly recommend it. It's once we get it set up, it's quite easy to import meshes all the way. Materials and everything work in O3D. We use O3D for its kind of modularity to quickly make new prototypes in the engine. It just is nice to have it all, something that's already set up, optimized, can run on devices. We test quite a bit of our prototypes on Quest 3. So we did have to make some fixes initially, but now it runs quite well. Galib has been uh, helping on a lot of this, working with me. He did a fantastic job on getting it up to snuff on Quest 3, everything working smoothly. He turned like the Android iteration time around from, I think it used to be like a few minutes if you want to like stop and redeploy, to now a few seconds if you only have asset changes. So it's greatly helped our workflow. So with that brief introduction, I'll dive into Cargo. So Cargo is a product by KitBash, KitBash3D, and it's essentially just a license that allows you to go and download many other assets. So here's kind of what this looks like. You have locations, you can download materials. They have really, there's a ton of different assets. And the best part is that they have kind of ready-made kits. So they have all these different themes, and they have just a ton and ton and ton of themes. So you can go very like old school fantasy. You can do something kind of more modern, realistic. You can go into a very sci-fi usage. Um, and the best part about these is that they come with like a full, some of them come with a full set of buildings or modular blocks so that you can download multiple of these and then go stitch them together in your own level asset. The memory requirements are here on the side, so it will tell you how many polygons the mesh is, what the size scale is, how many materials it has, and then for textures you can pick what resolution you want and whether you want them to be downloaded in JPEG or PNG. So for O3D we support both, so either works. Um, and then you can also go and get scenes that are closed scenes, and this is really to our benefit because then you don't have to supply your own skybox or whatnot or the surrounding environment. It's just all kind of wrapped up. So this is kind of a cut view of this asset, but then you can see it kind of wraps around. So you just have different slices. Um, to get this set up, when you first download Cargo and get your license, they do have a free license that comes with a limited amount of downloads. So anyone who wants to try this out, highly suggest it. And then they have a paid individual license, and then they have a bigger license for companies, contributors, kind of like an enterprise type license. I think it's called Teams. Um, one nice thing they do have is they have a voting seats. So you don't if you don't want to give this to like all your whole team so that everyone has a license, because I think the enterprise license is about well, I don't want to misquote what the price is, but you can go on the website. It's around was about, I think for us, we got 2 seats. It's about 1,000 per seat, less than 1,000 per seat, but about over 900 for 2 seats. And that's for the whole year, unlimited downloads. Uh, and it's been great because we don't have one person using it all the time. So there is a seat aside from the admin seat that can be changed. So we can shift that to different users so that they can get some assets and test that out. Right now, we just mostly use it between tech artist and engineer. So they can both grab some assets and test this out. Um, yeah, it's been great. So when you download this, set up your account, you will be prompted uh, and to ask for the target software. So this will export to uh, Unreal, Unity, Maya, Blender, a whole bunch of tools. Unfortunately, it does not directly support O3DE. Um, Once you set this up, you will, so here, for example, so in order to get to O3D, we use like a Blender roundabout. So this is set up to Blender. It will ask you, which version of Blender you're using. It will automatically detect which software versions you have available. So it will just prompt you for that. Once you have that set up in Blender, you can go under Preferences and the add-ons. You'll have this little KitBash Cargo 3D. So you can just check that, and then this will create a little in your little toolbar here on the side. It'll create KitBash3D cargo. So you can just hit activate that, and this will then connect to your cargo app. And so now you can go ahead and pick something you want to grab and to import into Blender. So I'll just delete the existing files here. Go ahead and grab a scene. Let's go take one of the apartments. Can select target software again, texture size, then just download. So we'll start the download, kick it off, and then it will automatically import it into Blender. So after a while, you should actually see it start appearing in Blender. Once it is in Blender, we have some scripts that we are not yet public, but we will try to release it as open source in the quite near term. These scripts help us export uh, Blender scenes as individual meshes, FBXs, as well as materials, all the textures, straight into O3DE, so that we don't have to do any of that manual work manually. These are all work from Galib, so if he will, I think he's around. Yeah, so he
Yeah,
will
I'm here.
dive into that in a second. Uh, I'll just kind of finish up this part, and then after he finishes, I will go into like how you get the scene into O3D nicely like lit up and have make it look as best I can. So here we have it's already imported. So this is the scene now in Blender from Cargo. You can go out and save it as whatever blend file you want. So you can just name it from Cargo, save it out. And then once you save it, once it's all set up, there's this O3D export that we have. And this is what will allow you to export the scene into O3D. So you just give the scene a name, and then you select your project file location in here, and then you can export it. There is several options. So if you've already exported it, you can say, I want to re-export it, overriding the textures, overriding materials, etc. And then very important is first time we exported it, we realized that the cargo assets seem to be using OpenGL texture convention. And so what that will cause is the normals to be flipped. So you want to, uh, as opposed to like the DirectX standard. So this is now on by default, so it's already set. But if it's not, you want to make sure that flip Y channel is active. Otherwise, your normals will be a little bit messed up, and you'll need to come back and re-export them. And then once this is all done, you can open O3DE, go to the console after a bit of setup, and then just execute a command that will load the scene file, parse it, and then again populate your scene with the assets. Yeah, so that's about it for like the importing process. I'll let Galib talk now a bit about the scripting side of things, and then once he's done, I'll come back to the scene and how we got it to look the way it does in O3D.
Okay, thank you, Anton. So basically, I'm gonna go into a little bit more details how the scripting side works. As mentioned, there are two set of tools. One tool exports the scene. I'm gonna share my screen to uh, share screen. Okay. So basically, um, there are two set of tools. One is the Blender script that once we make it public, people will be able to install it on Blender, which appears with the name O3DE export. And then there is another script called O3D import, which is the one we execute on the editor. So without further ado, I'm gonna try to do a live import of this level called the Temple of Triton. So I'm gonna download it. This is from the Atlantis kit, and we're gonna live import it into O3DE. So once it's download, we import again. And in this case, I made the mistake that I click import while I left the cube and the default light and camera from Blender, but that's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. It will still be part of the export. But typically you wanna delete the whatever you have in your Blender scene um, while it loads. Um, One of the interesting things is that the way this script works is that every mesh in the scene becomes a unique FBX file. And the reason it was done that way is because we noticed that when we try to import a big FBX that has a lot of message in it, it tends to just overwhelm the asset processor and it never completes the import process. And especially if you had further changes to the scene where you modify one little object, then it changes the whole FBX, which causes reprocessing of the whole FBX, which is not a good workflow. So basically, the key workaround to all of those issues is to make every mesh a unique asset. Like in this case, if we expand the object tree, we can see, everything there here. Everything that we can highlight as an isolated object is going to become also an isolated mesh and also an entity in O3DE with the corresponding mesh. Here with this button, we can kind of pre-render, fast render with the texture. It takes a while because it's loading the textures for the first time, but we can see the scene pre-render. So this is kind of what it's going to look like once we load it into O3DE. Okay. So I had everything set up with the project. I'm going to give the name is important because this name is going to be used by the O3D import script to know what is scene to load. So I'm going to call it Temple of Triton. And then let me see, export scene, because this also can export, like in cases you make a change to one object, you can also export only one object or export the whole scene at a time. So I click on export scene and it shows you progress bar is exporting every mesh, every texture. It also has a cool feature, this script, where typically by default, the material system doesn't support multi-channel sampling. So like if you have a texture with RGBA and you just want a particular channel to be sampled, and that's not kind of, you can do that with material canvas with your own material, but the default materials don't support that. So we actually, the script actually detects those cases, and every channel gets exported as its own textures, and it gets properly set up with the materials. You can see that we're done here exporting. You can see that the material, the asset processor is crunching through all of those meshes and textures that were exported. So while that's doing that, we're going to create a new level, a default level. And the name here is irrelevant, so I'm just going to call it Triton. Let's wait that maybe the asset processor is taking too much CPU. Hmm, I'm going to try to kill this. Where is the editor? Oh, there it is. I don't know what was. It looks like it's coming back to life. Yeah, it looks like it was the whole. Okay, so we are here. So all we need to do is execute. I had a copy paste here. Do a Pyron file where we execute the script. And we need to put here the exact name of the level that we exported. Now, granted, what is going to happen is that this is the project in the assets folder. This script, the O3DE export, create a scenes folder. And there under scenes, you can see I have other levels that I have uploaded. We just exported this one, Temple of Triton. So this is the name we need to use. And if we go inside Temple of Triton, we can see that there is a materials folder with all of the materials, a meshes folder with all of the FBXs. If we go here, we can see everything is an FBX, including the starting cube that I forgot to delete. Textures, of course, all textures will eventually show up there. And most importantly, this is a JSON file that is kind of, I call it the extension SGR for a scene graph, which basically, let me open this quickly with this little JSON file. Basically, this has the hierarchy of objects and their transform. It's basically the transform, what is the mesh asset, and what are the materials. And it goes for every object and it gives the hierarchy. So it's a small, technically a small, very small JSON file that contains the whole hierarchy. So this is the scene, how the data get organized in the assets folders of the project. So this is called Temple of Triton. It's still processing, so it's nonetheless we can start executing the script, and it's going to start at least populating the scene. And you can see it created all of the entities on the left side. And also, this is a script that you can run many times as needed. So it actually, let's say, for example, you add a physics component to a particular entity. When you re-export a scene and try to import it, it's not gonna remove that physics component. It just changes the meshes and the materials that were exported. So it's almost as you could use now Blender as your source of level creation, and the editor just becomes a visualizer of the scene. That way you don't do the same work twice. So for example, it kind of finished here, but you can see that some of the scenes, some of the meshes are missing because maybe they are still under asset processing. Um, so you can, when this happens, we can just keep running the same script, and any new asset that starts to pop up, it starts to, show up and so on. Eventually, when the whole scene is loaded, you can also say, for example, if you have like a very large scenes and you're worried of a crash and you don't want to lose the progress, you can say there is a command that is called I think it's the S one here, where you can say every 10 entities save the level for whatever state it is. That way, if something happens, you have to kill the editor, you just come back again and you continue, but it's gonna you're gonna preserve the state of the level as it was being built. If we enter here game mode, but again, everything looks much better as soon as the asset processor keeps finish crunching through the textures and the materials. I'm gonna exit game mode, and I'm gonna run this again, see if there is progress in some of the, yeah, more meshes show up. I think we got this mesh. So anyways, Anton, I think for sake of expediency, you can continue with the scene that you already loaded. And maybe we can come back as soon as my machine is done processing materials and to
Sounds good.
show the finished work. So I'm gonna relinquish the screen sharing here. How can I,
Can be on the top of your screen usually.
maybe this? No. Meetings. Zoom just changed. Why is so hard to find the meeting now?
Do you have a bar at the top of your screen for screen sharing?
Oh, I guess, yeah, there it is. Stop. Okay, thank you.
All right, so this is one of the scenes that we imported, that we got in, and when you import the scene directly, it will not look fantastic. Like this is what it looks like kind of by default. And the reason it looks like this is it if I just import it over the standard add-on default environment or the standard scene that you import, all it has is like the sunlight and this environment map that it's using. And so this environment map is the only thing, and plus the sunlight is the only thing that's actually getting applied to the scene as lighting. So everything here is lit by the environment map and nothing else. And so what I did to get the result is I just disable both those things, the sun and the global sky. And then I have my own lighting, and you can see it looks already just worlds apart. So I'm just going to go over what I did to get all this set up. The only things I added is like this lighting with these light components inside, and I have one post effects component where all my post effects, uh, one entity, sorry, that all the post effects are on it. One thing I recommend before you actually start editing anything is having post effects with exposure control. Because if you don't have exposure control and if you don't have the control type set to eye rotation, it will just look too dark or too bright, and you won't get a sense of how your lighting is being applied in the scene. So enable exposure control, enable eye adaptation, and then that will help you with your whole workflow. All the other post effects I would recommend coming back at the end. Um, so yeah, all the meshes with materials are all imported in under this entity as Galib was showing. So this is the whole scene that we get from KitBash. And then on top of that, we have lighting. So first thing I added is main light. I can actually maybe just go over the scene quickly. So this room is kind of like a science fiction room, cyberpunk aesthetic. So you get these two chairs, wires hanging. Uh, there's some emissive materials. Uh, One thing I will note is that in the scripts, the import scripts that set the materials will be set up with the proper emissive textures and opacity textures, but those seem to be disabled by default. But enabling them is just a matter of going to the material editor and setting those up. So these little lights here at first weren't present, but that's easy fix. It's just like one click to get them in. And that's something we can just extend the script to get. But if you're importing, or if we release the scripts and you import them, that's just something that you might need to look out for initially. It has a little operating room here. It's again a lot of ambient lighting, and then some uh, little scene up here with a little mattress, some lights. And so first thing I did to this room is let me just have this set up. Is I added a kind of a main light, a spotlight over here to kind of light up this whole scene. If you don't have, so this is like the scene without any lighting at all. This will get like the initial kind of vibe going. On this light, lights are different types. So for this one, I took a spotlight, this shape. I set the intensity, and also very important is enabled shadows. By default, shadows will be quite low res. They, I don't believe, have any shadow filtering. The reason this default is here is because if you add lights that have very high defaults, it can hurt performance without the user being aware of it. So they want you to kind of opt into like the higher quality. So you can see like it's just very pixelated shadows, but you can easily fix that by going to 1024. We support like up to 2048, but that's quite overkill for most scenarios. And then you get the shadows, but it still looks a bit blocky. So you can set it to PCF. And then if you want to have a bit more performance for PCF, you can set it to 9. There's different, it's not a smooth setting. So if you go up to 10, it doesn't actually go to 10, it goes to the next default, which I believe is maybe 12. Anyway, so 9 is quite a good setting for PCF, and then you get nice softer shadows in the environment. The next thing you want is to add diffuse probes. So diffuse probes will give you the bounce lighting in the scene. Uh, without it, like you have, without it, anything that's in shadow is essentially 100% dark. So getting diffuse probes in helps light it up. Diffuse probes have a shape attached to it, and you can edit this shape. It will be kind of highlighted with this semi-transparent mesh, and you can just grab the side things and drag it back and forth to extend your volume as you want, and that will extend the probes inside of it. Once you're done with that, just go back to the axis align box shape, click done, and it'll be set. You can then also set the spacing of your probes if you want to. And then that gives you all that nice bounce light inside of the volume. So just turn it again on and off. So now we have a point light, so light source, we have our diffuse probes. The next thing you want is a specular probe. So specular probe or reflection probe is very important for anything that's metallic because metallic doesn't have any diffuse lighting. So if your metal is not hit by your spotlight and it's not your spotlight over here, and it's not hit by any other lights that you have in your scene, it'll just be completely dark. So we'll add in a specular probe, and now you can see again the difference is, especially for metallic objects, like the wall back here is quite diffuse. Specular probe doesn't do much to it, but anything that has any sheen or metallicness to it will definitely benefit. You can visualize the specular probe, just show visualization. So here's the placement of it. In the scene, it essentially captures a cube map of wherever you place it and then applies it to the environment. The reflection probe, same as the diffuse probes, have a shape that you can edit. So you can extend it to what you want covered in the scene. In this case, I just kind of covered this area with the seats. And again, just say done. Once you're done setting the extents, you won't actually see any difference. You'll need to go in and hit bake reflection probe. And that will spend a couple seconds running it, baking the cube map out. What you want to do is definitely bake it with diffuse after diffuse probes, because diffuse probes will obviously alter the scene and the lighting in the scene. And the other thing is you'll want to bake the lighting twice, because the first time you bake it, all your metals in the scene or the metals in the scene that are not in direct light will be completely dark. And so those won't appear on the reflection. But once you do have a reflection probe in, then those metals get their color, and then that color can be baked back in to have the reflection in. So bake it twice, and then that creates like the nice reflection in the scene. Uh, so that's for this area. Upstairs, I just have two lights that aren't shadowed. Oh, sorry, those are specular upstairs lights, yeah. Here, these are just tube lights. So for these, I have kind of a tube shape. You can see it here. And I try to match with these lights upstairs. Um, you can specify the shape, again, the kind of capsule shape here. So you can say you want to be shorter, or you can want to be longer. That will kind of extend past. You can move it, rotate it. Uh, for this one, I was just playing around with the length to get it to be the size of this light roughly. Same thing over here. These lights, capsule lights, do not cast shadows. So they're just kind of like a ambient lighting. So your lighting won't be as detailed, but this is an area of the scene that I didn't want to spend too much time in. I just want a bit of light up here. You can also, on each light, each light has an attenuation radius that affects how far the light and how far in the scene the light will cast its lighting. Uh, by default, it has like an automatic setting. You can leave it at that, but you can also explicitly specify how far you want the light to reach into the scene. This is more for culling purposes. So if I keep the light at a short distance, it won't affect any of these pixels. And generally, this light won't affect any of these pixels anyway, because it's a bit too far. If it does, it will make a very small difference, hardly noticeable. So it's nice to kind of control that radius. The automatic attenuation radius is usually quite conservative, so it can lead to quite larger area that's covered by the light. So that's more for performance consideration. Uh, then in this little scene here, this little operating room, again, without anything added, it's quite dark. You do have some nice bounce lighting from the emissive materials in here, That's cool. But for my looks, I want to add another uh, point light. This one, oh, sorry, no, this is not operating light. So another spotlight that does cast shadows as well. Same kind of shadow setting to get the nice soft shadows on it. And then same thing here. All the metals are kind of dark in this area, so you need another specular probe that really lights up the scene. So I'll just toggle that on and off a bit so you can see the difference. All your reflections kind of come to life and make the scene, especially in this kind of like a metallic heavy cyberpunk scene, it makes a huge difference. If I want to visualize this probe, this is what it looks like in the center. Again, bake it twice so that the metallics can, the metallic lighting can get baked into it. Um, and yeah, it extends just this little scene. This is the bounds again of the. Um, let's see what else. I have a point light that I disabled just because I thought that it was better without it. Without it, it has a kind of like a nicer, darker mood to it. And then finally, I have this little desk light here. It's just a simple point light, no shadows, just to give some extra mood to this area that was lacking in lighting a bit. Yeah, and then that's it. That's what you get for this scene. So with just few lighting tweaks, a couple of components, you can change the entire look of the scene. Uh, I will point out that let me just save it quickly. It also is quite performant. So my screen is a 4K screen, so the entire editor takes up 4K pixels. We're not quite at 4K in the viewport, but 4K resolution, but we do have quite a high resolution, and this is running a easy like 70 to 80 FPS in O3DE. And this is running with diffuse probes set to be ray traced every frame. Uh, so the diffuse probes use ray tracing to gather the lighting data. What you can do is if you're content with how the scene is set up, you can bake the diffuse probe grid. So I will bake all the textures onto the diffuse probes. And then once that's done, if you want to see the difference of time, you can just set the editor mode to baked. And then that should increase the frame rate quite significantly. Maybe it's because Zoom is on, but yesterday I was getting like up to 120 FPS by using just baked textures for diffuse probes. So that's kind of a performance into how it will be in game if you use bake. You can also, just for like an artistic flow, keep editor mode to real time, so you always see up-to-date lighting. But then once you're done with your scene, you want to export to your game, you can set the runtime to baked. And then again, when you're content with your lighting, you just bake it. And this way you'll keep getting updated lighting if you uh, toggle your lighting or if you move your lights around the scene. So you can kind of see, I don't know how visible it is over Zoom, but if you look at something like this, you can see how the lighting adapts over time as I enable or disable the lighting. So that's just the ray trace diffuse probes updating in real time. Then I'll just go a little bit into some of the post effects. So if you want to kind of change the white balance, you can give your scene a bit of a tint, like a warmer or colder feel to it. Um, you can just leave it at 0 will be the default, and then you can further adjust the tint if you want to give it a different vibe. So we have that component. Uh, there is SSAO. SSAO is on by default, but if you want to change the settings, you'll need to add the component. It just adds shadows into different regions of the scene. So again, toggle it on off. Um, Here I just increase the strength to give it a bit of a darker feel. So you can completely turn it off with the strength by itself. You can make it overly dark. Around 1.6 is what I felt was good for this scene. I added some vignetting just to give it kind of darker, more focused look. If anyone is not familiar with Vanadian, it essentially does this at the extreme. So just kind of darkens the corners, but a slight darkening I felt helped with the vibe. Exposure control is very important. I talked about it briefly at the beginning. You want it to set to eye adaptation so that it actually changes within the scene. If you don't have it, if you have it set to manually only, you just have one eye adaptation for the whole scene, and then anything that might be too bright, like if I have the sun environment, so like skybox, if I adjust it to make the skybox look kind of decent, it might be then too bright inside and vice versa. Might not going for the look. So having that adaptation is quite important. As you can see here, it adopts quite a bit and then will lower itself in bright environments. And then even with adaptation enabled, you can still manually tweak it to different to have a bias. So if you want your scene to look kind of bright or a bit overexposed, you can increase the manual compensation. For this scene, I wanted it to look a little bit more darker and kind of a bit more kind of like an underground area. So I just set this to -1 to get that look on it. And then finally, if you want to have some depth of field or take some nicer images, you can enable this. So this depth of field will just have this kind of like a bokeh effect on objects that are out of focus. By default, the focus point is kind of in the middle of your screen. If you want to change that, you can change where you sample your screen with these coordinates here. So by default, 0.5, 0.5 will be at the center, kind of highlighting like how this autofocus works. So if you're looking at the chair, it will focus on the chair. If you're looking at the wall, it will change the focus there. And then this is, yeah, quite nice for taking screenshots, making your scene look a little bit nicer overall. For gameplay, it can be a little bit finicky if you want to uh, have if the focus is always shifting. If you have like a very fast-paced game, but what you can do is you can also disable the autofocus and just manually set how far away you want it to focus. So I can set to be very close to the camera, and then everything further away is quite far, quite blurred. I can set it to be like much further away, and then things that are closer will be more blurred. So it just depends what you're going for. You can, like all components, you can control this via script canvas or Lua with the behavior context. Um, so yeah, that covers, I think, everything I did for this area, this level. Hope it was useful. I can briefly show a different level I imported. Unfortunately, it's also a cyberpunk aesthetic. I wish I had done something that was maybe a bit more classical or fantastical, uh, just to showcase how O3DE can support like in different scenarios or high fidelity rendering. So this is a bit of a smaller scene. Uh, it's just a small bedroom with a kitchen.